except through a mutation. Natural selection just does what selection, the word is defined to mean. It selects from what is already there. It's selecting from the genes that are already there. And they're saying, well, you get, over time you get these good beneficial mutations and you select the beneficial ones. Well, there are no good new information, genetics coming about. It's all a loss of information, as he pointed out. To go from an amoeba to eventually to other creatures, you're going to need all this new information. It's just not there. So it's against, and that's what's accepted as science. Again, academia has been screening out people, teachers, that see these obvious fallacies. It's just like the press, 90, 85% of the press don't believe there's a God, they don't go to church, they're different than the average population in America because they are screened out. You tend to want to work with people you think are intelligent. And why would you want to work with people who are so conservative or who don't believe in that we evolved from the mud, from the goo to the zoo to you, that don't want to believe that? They actually claim that science doesn't support it, I mean, I'd love to have Isaac Newton, Michael Faraday, and Robert Boyle sitting here next to us, Jay, and they could argue this point, and I'd love to hear people call them, you dumb, old-fashioned scientists, but, they'd have some interesting things to say. They'd catch right up with modern science and, a little bit of study and give them a year or so. They'd be, maybe even less. They'd be right up to snuff, and it would be fun to have them here. And all of science is based on what all these guys did. And they talked against atheism. There were lots of atheists in the 1700s, 1800s in England and in Europe, lots of them. And they left their writings talking about how atheism doesn't fit science and the world as we see it.
A fly and a wasp. And we still have a fly and a wasp. We have a fossil of a fly, a fossil of a wasp. But we don't have those millions of transitional fossils between the fly and the wasp.
Nope.
The fly has to get new information to go to a wasp, but genetically, as we have studied the genome process, there's a loss from that fly to the next fly.
If there's a mutation, there's a loss.
And so, again, scientifically, Mike,
you're never going to get...
What do we infer out of the scientific study of the fly and the wasp?
That someone designed that information, which is incredibly complex. It's, we talked about it. It's like stacking up CDs 68 miles high full of information. That's the kind of information that's in every one of our cells. 68 miles
Wow.
of skinny little CDs full of information, 68 miles in every one of our cells, and you can't even see the cell. How difficult is that to do on that minutia, to get that much information that works, that we can analyze and figure out what it means? This guy, John Sanford, he does a great analogy. He used to be an evolutionist. He's a geneticist, PhD. I think he still donates time at Cornell, where he taught for many, many years. He's got lots of patents. He's made all sorts of money, invented the gene gun. He did lots of experimentation with zapping plants. Millions of plants were zapped around the globe to create these mutations to see what they would get. It's always a loss of information. Always. But he points out, he became a believer and a design follower and a creationist along the way. And he said, he believed all that stuff. And we'll be right with you, with you, Ricard.
Richard, I think.
Is that Richard? That's spelling. We've got to work on our spelling around here. We'll be right with you, Richard. But John Sanford points out, it's like, you got to have errors. Mutations are errors in the genome, cause an error. So it's kind of like, he says, if you have a manual, an instruction manual to build a little red wagon. You know those little red wagons when you were a kid, you'd love your parents or somebody to pull you in? It's just 4 little wheels with a little red box you sit in with a long handle. You can pull your groceries or your child in it. I used to love to go for rides as a kid and something like that. But anyhow, you got an instruction manual, and it teaches you how to build it. It teaches you how to make the paint, red paint, from scratch. Paint, you need paint. Rubber for the wheels. So it's kind of complex. There's a little more complexity to it than you might think. You got everything in that instruction manual to build that little red wagon. Well, then you start to have mutations, errors, typo errors in the instruction manual. Now, do you think with a lot of typo errors, over time, millions and millions of years, you're going to go from the little red wagon to a bicycle? And then you're going to go from a bicycle to a motorcycle. And then you're going to go through, you got now a manual of instructions from a bicycle. It's not going to happen. You're never going to get the bicycle through errors in the instruction manual of how to make rubber, how to make paint, and how to make the wheels. By making errors in those letters, you're not going to come up with a perfectly written book on how to make a bicycle, or how to make eventually a motorcycle or a car, or excuse me, or a rocket or a spaceship. It's never going to happen. Common sense just shows that to you. And of course, it's not science. It's never been proven. Evolutionists like to say that theirs is proven science. Well, you can't prove any of this in the lab. You can't prove creationism, intelligent design. You can't prove it. You can't experiment and recreate it. And you can't do it yet in the lab with evolution. Eventually, the mind of man, which is made in the image of God, is going to be able to do some incredible things. But then again, it's the mind doing it. So again, it comes from a mind. The information coming again from mind. Richard, how are you doing tonight? And which Richard are you? You're not that Richard who's a Unity.
No, that's not me, Mike.
Good.
Okay, hey, I want to throw a couple things at you. I'm going to start with some scripture, Genesis 6:2. All right?
Okay.
Okay, and then you spoke a little bit earlier, or Mike did, about how academia weeds out the people who start seeing through the charade. Well, I'd like to bring up Harvard Professor John E. Mack. He was the head of the Harvard Psychology Department. I'm pretty sure he founded he founded a lot of the psychology department at Cambridge University too. Dr. Mack recently died. He died in 2004. Him and some others of his Harvard colleagues were in the middle of making a movie called The Experiencers. And Dr. Mack was, this is, like I said, this is the head of the psychology department at Harvard. So, and he was the smart guy. He was no, stuffy, cold bird. He was right on top of things. And they had brought up the phenomenon of alien abduction to him, and he just poo-pooed it at first. But somewhere or another, somebody, I think it was Bud Hopkins, had got him to check it out, and he just candidly said he was blown away. There's a way that a good psychologist can tell if you're lying or if you're delusional. And the reason I bring up Genesis 6:2 is because I want to talk about the Nephilim. I don't know if one of you guys can read a little bit of that, or if I should just go on.
Well, you can go on briefly, but most people have no idea what that is, so I don't want to get too into something that most people have no idea what it is, and I know where you're going, but go ahead.
Oh, well, yeah, okay. Well, yeah, the reason it's a big deal to me is basically, Genesis 6:2 says that the Benai Elohim begot children with the daughters of men. And these children were genetically different. They were considered giants or men of renown because of their physical characteristics. Now there's a group of people, good learned Christians, who believe that these Benai Elohim are men of God, just ordinary men. And there's another group of people who believe that these are the Nephal comes from the word fallen, and that these are the fallen angels who, somewhere or another, who could not procreate with themselves, had managed to find a way to do that with human beings, and that these Harvard academia and this movie, The Experiencers, proves the point scientifically that this isn't a visitation, this so-called alien menace. It's a control system, and it's talked about deeply in Scripture.